G'day and welcome to Market Sam After Work. Today I want to go through a final for the season at least, update on the 22 Magnum or the Rimfire ELR project that we've been up to. Listen, it started, and I'll go from a quick nutshell from the beginning. It started from a place of a Rimfire project, which to shoot in the way of ELR more effectively than the likes of the 22 long rifle. Something where you can start to do a little bit of hand loading but with a little bit more power and try and make all that combination work is where I started from. And there are other choices. There's the likes of the 17 WSM, which has more power, but the reason I chose the 22 was a little bit more bullet weight, because one of the features of ELR is being able to see your impacts. And that little bit heavier bullet, in theory, gave you that better result. So I started down that place, and that's where it's at. But to be truthful, it also turned into sorting out the 22 Magnum, the 22 WMR. So, and what I mean by that, when I dug into the initial side of it and did a little bit of shooting and then did a little bit of research, there is definitely a band of people that think the 22 mag is the most accurate and best fun, and it's great for everything and can do anything sort of round, and they have these amazing groups they talk about. But the practical side of things and the reality side of things is, no, they can be okay, they can be lots of fun, they're great little short range rifles, but between the ammunition and the way the rifles are set up, they are far less regular and not quite perfectly set up for precision or in any comparison to the likes of a centerfire rifle. And they're not generally as accurate as much as they're more powerful. They're not generally anywhere near as accurate as a good 22 long rifle or even as a 17 HMR. In both cases, both the 22 long rifle, you can get precision ammunition for them. They are set up to suit what they do. And the 17 HMR, similar sort of things, not target ammunition. It's too small a bullet really for that sort of stuff. But the barrel twist, which is one of the features we found with the 22 Magnums, but in a 17, the barrel twist, the little ammunition are made, it's done in a much more modern fashion, and they tend to work a little bit better. Haven't got the little bullet, doesn't have the length in it, doesn't have the legs in it in any real sense, but still the likes of 17 HMR is very well sorted in that side of it. The 22 Magnum, on the other hand, a slow barrel twist, 1 in 16 is probably the common twist inside there, so can't take much of a ballistic coefficient in the way of a bullet. And the ammunition, not a lot of effort going into it, as we found out. Now, what I should say with that, there is different barrels that work better than others, different rifles that work better than others. The normal sort of rimfire thing, we have an Anschutz rifle with a slightly tighter rifling in it, slightly tighter tube, runs a bit more consistent speed and is a little bit more accurate, but only really can shoot the factory ammunition. Once again, hasn't got this twist in the barrel. And we went through and did those tests. We started with this little Ruger Precision rifle here, or Rimfire Precision in the Ruger 22 Magnum. They're using the term precision little loosely. It's more advertising. Awesome little fun gun. You see how I now use it. I now have it with a red dot on top of it, and it really is we did a lot to it with different scopes and set it all up in bits and pieces, made extensions and stiffened up the flexible stock and all sorts of bits and pieces to this thing and to get it better. But ultimately, it could only get so far. I think this is a 1 in 14 twist, but still not enough twist for what I wanted. I chose it because of the extra twist. Works really well, but really not good enough to take further in my definition of it anyway, my thoughts on it anyway. It goes back to a plinker, which is an awesome little plinker. Really enjoy playing with this rifle, but not something that was going to go on the precision side of things. So then in the precision side of things, there's lots of choices. You could go for better, more precision rimfires. I chose to build our own, and that started with the Lithgow LA101 as the action on that, with a screw-in tenon, with a three lug bolt lock up No doubt lots of other good choices out there, but this is one I chose to carry on with. Then a swan barrel, 1 in 8 twist swan barrel. Probably would go further next time I did it into a 1 in 7, but 1 in 8 as I went with is a pretty standard deal. Little muzzle brake, more aesthetics than anything else, but still on there because we were doing it all thoroughly. This is a Southern Cross small arms chassis, basically solid. It was made to suit the Lithgow, so it made it easy, pretty cheap to do it. I did some mods and bits and pieces with the bipod setup in the front there. Made it where locked up the to get the extra length of pull in this little chassis. Got it with the folding stock part, but actually locked all that up so it's already rigid. Put one of my little bag riders on it. Pretty simple in that side of things. Didn't have to do any more. And for our final shoot at 1,000 yards, we did have the little Night Force NX8 on it, very good scope. Because I knew I was going to get up into more needed elevation in the 150 minutes of angle type thing, I went with this little March scope. Simple way to do it, easy to bolt on and zero and set up, and then this can wind right up to 300 minutes. So I had ready to do whatever I needed to do, and that's why I went with this March scope. Obviously awesomely good quality in the way of vision and that sort of stuff, but nice and simple system rather than bolting on other bits and pieces to get over the 120 minutes of elevation that would have had to otherwise. So that was that little combination. Lots of rifle for the little project, but I suppose I look at it along the lines of, if you're going to test around properly, then you test it with the best quality rifle you can, to try and make sure you're not got any rocks to hide behind because the rifle wasn't good enough or the barrel wasn't good enough or something wasn't good enough. Then there's no rocks to hide behind. You've got to show exactly what you did because you have the equipment to do it with it. So that's where we ended up there, and where we're in the story so far. We've got from understanding a little bit about the ammo. It's made for lower twist barrels, as most of the rifles are. We did test some bits and pieces, found better and worse. The best we found that ran in that little Ruger Precision was we were shooting at 600 yards to start off with, 24-inch plate, trying to make that sort of work, and we were using the 50 grain, it's the Game Shock Federal ammo, seemed to work the best in that situation. Fast forward a little bit, that's just some factory rounds that we shot, fast ones to heavy ones to that sort of stuff. I then started to mess with things in the way of what I could do. This was back in using the Ruger Precision, changed over to using it in this one here once we started to build it. But bigger bullets, and I think that's a 60 grain, I've forgotten exactly what I put it in to start off with, but 60 grain, 50 grain, 40 grains, different, a lot better quality target, centerfire ammunition style of bullets, there where I went through the process of pulling the bullet out of a given round in the testing I was doing. Went too far in some places where pull out and put too heavy a bullet into the combination. So if you've got a round that was set up with a 30 grain round and you go and put a 50 grain bullet on top of that, then there's too much pressure. You'll burst a case. Very simple stuff. We didn't quite go to that level, but we did push the boundaries a little bit too far and found where we had one burst case. Destroyed a magazine, didn't do anything else, but it was too much to go there. So do have to be careful. And in doing any of this sort of stuff, doing one test shot with whatever you've done and actually having a look at the back of the brass and seeing how swollen it is. They will swell to a certain degree. They do push back. They are just a little very, very light, thin shell. And where the primer section is, or in the base of the brass, you'll actually see it push back a little bit. So it's always testing and making sure it works. But it went from these long bullets which had to be, or these long rounds that had to be single fed, which in both these things were awkward to do. Now, with modifying your action and making it so it's easier to single feed, doing that sort of things, and that would be a real path forward. You know, that would be a way of doing that, single feeding and going with longer projectiles. I didn't find a lot of performance gains, although there may be more with messing with different powders and bits and pieces. And set up and playing that game would be another path. But part of my whole logic here was to build something that was not only capable but also fun in the way of it wasn't a pain to use, it was okay to use. So what could I get down to in making things work? That progressed down to, where are we? It progressed down, I got lower and lower, basically getting to where the combination was fine with compressing the powder a little bit as long as I got the powder levels right. So get in this case here, which is where we got, and we've got to where we were doing, I think they were burgers on the last 600-yard test we did, but 40 grain projectiles that had been put into this Hornady, the 30 grain VMAX ammo. That together got me really good speed. I'll get into there was crimping involved as well, but got me really good speed around the 2100 feet per second. In a halfway decent ballistic coefficient, and started to be really consistent. I was really happy with the way that was starting to work, and it would fit in the magazine. This is clear, obviously, clear magazine, but this is, and really with a little, I had to modify this a little bit, and I would suggest whatever magazine you're working with, there has to be a little bit of room to make it work like I did, but those rounds there would actually fit inside this magazine. I just pulled the guts out, ran a round file through the front, and gave myself a tiny more clearance for the points. Not too much, think about 40 thou, about a millimetre of clearance through there, and that's all I needed to do. And then I could put 10 rounds in the magazine, which is a lot nicer way to plink away with a rimfire rifle, putting the work into getting the rounds right. Made it work. I was getting a little bit over 2100 feet per second out of a 40 gram projectile, and that was pretty decent. That's what I ended up doing to do that 600 yard shoot. But I just tested, as I noted in that video, this little round you're looking at here. A lot better, which was a 40 grain Muzzle projectile. It was actually a little varmint projectile that had a lot better ballistic coefficient. I think we were running from 0.15, and these were going to the 0.235. So get the same sort of speeds, a little bit over 2100 feet per second at the 0.35 or 0.235 G1 ballistic coefficient, meant that looked really good. We should get really low. We should have been able to basically cut down the amount of MOA needed, amount of time in the air, the amount the wind moves the projectile, all that sort of stuff should have been great. So I did up, as I have here. Another little feature about what we've done, they're going to come out of there, yep, is that by doing it all just right, you can end up with this, your ammo is then carries like normal. So it goes back in the box it came out of, all fits in there, magazine size ammo essentially. So that turns into where that fitted into there, and I did up them. I did up a couple of boxes of them. And we went out and tested. It took us, I think the first time we went out was where we're shooting normally where we didn't have the sun behind it. We couldn't see anything, just couldn't see anything from the result of actually firing them. All the math said it should be here, it wasn't here. So okay, stopped. We then went back out in an evening to shoot into the sun to see where those were landing. They used a lot more elevation than they were supposed to. A lot more, nearly double to get out there, and I thought, okay, what's going on? I did some more testing and realized what was actually happening. These little bullets, and I'd suggest for most of the little varmint bullets, are designed for they're designed for terminal ballistics. So they carry a lot of copper in the back of the round. There's a little bit of lead in the front there, and then they have the ballistic tip on the front of them. It means their center of balance is pretty out of whack. The center of gravity is pretty out of whack. They use spin and speed. So in the supersonic range of their flight, they use their spin RPM to sort them out. And really they're designed to be running at 3,500 feet per second neck of the woods. That's what a little 40 grain 22 cal projectile is normally going to be flinging along at in the way of varminting. And they will do that awesomely. They're very good and when I say inherently unstable, not unstable at that at all. They'll do that job precisely with a lot of precision, get there quickly, and really great. But the inherent instability I'm talking about is that if they don't have enough gyroscopic force on them, or if anything upsets them, their balance ratio means they want to swap around real fast. So they are some of the candidates that suffer from the transonic zone massively. They get hit with it really hard. Now, I didn't have a little camera out there watching it to watch this process, but I can tell you by that, what the maths of that's what's actually going on. The way I backed that up was quite simple. I all of a sudden clicked as to what was happening, and even though I'd loaded up a couple of those boxes of ammo, I thought, I know what's wrong. I've made a mistake here because they are a varmint bullet. They're not made with inherent stability. I swapped over to what you're looking at here, which is the 52 grain projectile. A little bit of process to go through that, which I'd been down this road before, but the 52 grain Berger, similar, or about the same ballistic coefficient, but it's not got a boat tail, and it's a heavier bullet. It's a heavier projectile, which means it can't run at the same speed. We're going to be compromised on speed a little bit. I can't use the 30 grain Hornady ammo. And I went through a process, some testing, a couple of tests in between. I had loaded them up before. They were running, and I tested last year sometime, they were running the 15-30 feet per second, which meant that they weren't ballistically, or their external ballistics, their speed they're running at meant they needed a lot of elevation to get there. But I had started to do some tests of the next bit of just swapping things over. And if you go through my videos last year, you'll realise that what I started to do at one point was do some testing of the amount of powder to see the variations. And I started down that road. I'd backed away from unloading all the powder and then evening it all out and putting it back in to make more precision, because it's a fair bit of work. But with a little bit of refining my equipment, that's the process I wanted to do, because I wanted to take this, this 50 grain game shot ammo, pull the bullets out, pull the powder out, and then weigh the case with the primer in it, and then even that out, so we have the empty cases with the primer in them, and get them to where I'm using a weight that is measure them all up, work out an average, pick the ones that are in the average, and go from there, and just get like that, which wasn't too bad. I really used about, I think 75%, 80% of the ones I pulled out. There were highs and lows beyond that point, but got them to even. I raised the powder. I can't remember exactly where the powder was, but I think it was in around the 5.6 grains. And I raised it to just over 6. Don't normally share powder loads. It would be very much specific, but we are talking little rimfire stuff, and we're talking still what was in the safe side for me. Once again, the test side of things, and even changing the projectile. In any format, you've got to be testing things. You've got to be using safety glasses when you do your test. There's all sorts of bits and pieces you've got to be prepared for. But I raised it to, it was actually 6.06 to 6.08. using a 0.02 discrepancy in the gauge I was using. So using a weights, a scales that was that accurate. So went through the process of doing that. Did it all by hand, did it with a little trickler, and did it all by hand. So pull it all out, do that, match up the brass, match up the powder, put it all back in, then put in the 52 grain projectiles, and went with the crimping. Like I said, I mentioned that I had found differences of that. That certainly made a difference right back in the beginning, even with factory 22 Magnum ammo. Just going across and putting a proper crimp on them, stabilize the pressure, stabilize the velocities, and raise the velocities. So I got a smaller ES and I got a better ES, depending on the rifle it is. If you've got a really tight tube, probably not going to make that much difference. But for the 3 or 4 that I tested it on, it did make a difference. So crimping wise, just getting that to right place. I don't want to be squashing the projectile. More isn't better. I want to get the right amount. I'm pushing the projectile in, crimping just past the biggest part. So I'm actually bringing the brass back down on it, because there's a fair bit of projectile inside there. But just getting to where it's a nice and even crimp there, work all that out, settle it up, and that's what I did with those rounds. So that's what these ones are. They are, and same deal, box of ammunition, another one ready for next time we play. But that's exactly what I did. Went through and did the you notice when I do this, by the way, on the top there is what they are, so there's no more details. That's because this is my ammunition, but they aren't just a box of ammunition. I could get confused with a normal game shot or the normal set of federal ammo. Anyway, that's what those are. They are matched brass, matched slightly raised powder, 52 grain Berger projectile, crimped or sized to fit in the magazine, and then crimped. And that's what we went out to the range and did that test with. It was supposed to be a calm day, wasn't quite erratic wind, but still not only did we get a very consistent group out there for the wind that we had, but it was very consistent. There weren't the flyers that people speak about with Rimfire. There was the inconsistency. I would put all of it down to the wind that I saw there. And I think, I don't know, I'm guessing, but it was probably around a 2 MOA group at 1,000 yards is really what we would have been seeing. Maybe a 3 MOA group. I think it was smaller. I think that'd mainly be on the plate from what I saw. And what I mean by what I saw is that one would go high, I'd back it up, another one would go high. I would then raise the thing and it would come back down to target and be just off in some place. Another by ELR holdover isn't as simple as move it by the difference you saw. There's more difference going on depending on the slope of the land and things like that. So a bit complicated, but it would move to where I asked it to move and I could back it up, and then I could go over to target and then it would move again. And I would always presume that, okay, is it the ammo? Is it me? Whatever, back it up. Oh, it's in the same place. So I was really seeing a group that might have been even under 1 MO, under 2 MOA. Don't know, 2 MOA would be my call. And I'd have to get back out there with all the things we do. I'd have to get back out there on a mild day to know more than that. But truthfully, that's part of this game. The part of this game is there are going to be better and worse days, and that did as I wanted to do. The other feature that I would note, which I was super impressed with, is we had the right sort of conditions, but they weren't the perfect and the driest and that sort of stuff. They were dry. It was windy, but we could actually see 1,000 yards with the 22. We could see it properly. With nice lights on it, we could see our impacts, which is exactly what I was trying to get to. And it means it's a conceivable little fun project to go and do. So all up, I'm very happy with the project. It's worked out nicely. I think we can prove it a little better with a better day, but it's doing exactly what I wanted to do. It is actually fun to do. It's not that complicated to go through and set things up to actually load that ammo. I was using a little trickler, so I could just hand wire it onto a good set of scales. The pulling the bullets out and that sort of stuff, we've been through basically. It is done with tinkering stuff, so getting bits and pieces and making things work to be able to seat the bullet, to be able to crimp the case properly, that sort of stuff. There isn't anything specific. I've made stuff out of bits and pieces. That's what this project is. It is a bits and pieces project. There may be someone who wants to go on with and make little bits and pieces for this. I suppose if there was enough demand, then that would be a smart business move. Not something we would take on, making dies. That's not really in our licenses or what we should be doing. But not that complicated, but equally it is in that tinkering world, step by step, baby steps, and get to that place. As for the rifle, it doesn't need to be this creature here. I wanted to build something that was done very thoroughly to make sure, like I said, no rocks to hide behind. Ultimately, a decent stock's going to do it without any problems. The average action is going to work quite well. We're not running too much pressure in anywhere, that sort of stuff. There's nothing too weird. The barrel, the 1 in 8 twist, what I've gone to, I would go 1 in 7 twist. Doesn't need muzzle brake, doesn't need most of what you're looking at here, and you still would be able to do what we're talking about. Obviously ELR, so obviously setting up so that you do have some form of a proper control, whether it's a bag rider, the bits and pieces are reasonably strong and flexible. Magazine loading, like I said, something that can run a little bit more length, not too much. I think some are probably going to run properly anyway. This is actually a CZ magazine, so not that complicated in that side of things. The likes of the scope, yes, it is ELR. That's part of what we're doing. So whether it's just a good rimfire scope on some adjustable, sliding adjustable like the No Limits, FX No Limits rings would do the job as well. Being able to dial on, you can also go to the level of Charlie Tarax or Night Force wedges and do it on the big end of town also. And that can be from shooting from the bench to shooting off an F-class bipod. It really doesn't matter. Any way you can do this. You can do it the way you would like to do ELR, but this really turned into where it was that little job, and it didn't need the extra fuss. By going magazine loading, set up your ammo, You can plink away. It's really, I presume for most people, nighttime shed duties of building that sort of ammo. And I should say, I use the Federal, is what worked for my combination with the projectiles that I had here. I think there are probably better projectiles that I could go for. You know, it does open up the thoughts of, do you go to a 60 grain projectile with less of a powder that works, and maybe that's combinations of bits and pieces than playing. Lots of testing involved, and I think you could probably improve things by another 10%, you know, maybe even 15% to get you less elevation needed. But ultimately, that was the other detail I was up to for me. I'm a busy man, lots of things to do. I wanted to get to a reasonable result without too much pain. This was still a fair bit of pain, don't get me wrong, fair bit involved and a fair bit of a learning process. But to end up with these little rounds here, work really well. You know, I should say, as I look over the top of them, the bit that I know would be a benefit, I'd have to set up the gear to do it, but would be to even just tip those bullets. So the tipping process, for those that don't realise, is basically taking the me-plat or the little hollow point in a target round, trimming it as part of it, and then tipping it, pushing it down, making it smaller and pointier. The more consistent and the smaller you get that, the more you raise the BC. I ideally would also end up with a tiny boat tail. A tiny boat tail will raise the BC, and it'll all bring things down to more consistency. But as said, well, with these, and these had a boat tail, their ballistic coefficient comes out of the fact they're a little bit lighter, they're a little bit longer, and they have a boat tail, but their weight balance was way out of whack. So there is games you can go too far. Like I said, my next step would be a 1 in 7 twist. I think would do this job even better. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter. What I've got to, I'm happy with. This is a real little ELR, precision ELR or precision Rimfire ELR rifle, and this has already been on target at 1,000 yards, and that was in pretty extreme conditions. So pretty happy with that process. We will no doubt next year get back and prove it to be better than that. Probably you want to be on 50% of the time at least before you call it a real success, or maybe 80%, I don't know, we'll see. But really enjoyed getting here. I hope you enjoyed watching the process. And as for questions of where do you get the dies and that sort of stuff, so it's not stuff that I could even repeat with what I've done. Lots of tinkering, lots of putting things together. It really is quite simple to do in the fashion of working out what's roughly going to fit with what you can get. And I think there is a bit of a network from Gunsmith and bits and pieces that should be able to help in those places. For guys that want to know more, then that's sort of a forum question to go through and ask people about that sort of stuff. These games have all been played before to some degree or another, but this is where we got to with it, and yeah, like I said, very happy with it. Anyway, guys, let us know any comments below. As for the rest of it, there is now half a dozen videos on this process, starting from the Ruger Precision, which, like I said, started off great. It was the right beginning to the project. Ultimately, like I said, I would put that much more into the fun brackets than the fun and the probably semi-tactical brackets rather than precision. This now has turned into something that is, well, custom, but that's a little bit the nature of where ELR tends to go anyway. Anyway, guys, I hope you liked the video. Thanks for checking in. I'll catch you next time.